things are vague. And you really should keep a record. Because it's good. Mother was very orthodox till the day she died. She was very orthodox. And she followed all the regulations and whatever. And she knew we deviated as we grew up. But she didn't face it. She didn't say, I'm disappointed or anything.
Where was your mom from?
Russia.
And your dad was from Russia also? They were both from...
She came when she was 15. And my father was older, a little older, maybe 19. And my mother was sharp and accomplished, and but she was widowed with 4 little children with no money, and she really quickly realized that she couldn't depend on anybody. She had brothers and a sister who were very kind and all that, but they didn't have any money. So she knew very quickly that she had to make a living, because my father died. I was 11 when my father died, and nobody had any real money. So one of her brothers had a chicken meat market, and he said, I will teach you. And she rented a store. She'd never been in business in her life. She'd never done anything like that. And he showed her how to work the thing. And for many years, she ran this business with 4 little girls. Sarah was 2. And my mother had somebody who was like a sitter who took care of Sarah while my mother had the store. It is a miraculous story because 4 of us grew up with no father and a mother eking out an existence. We thought we were pretty well off. We didn't know. The all-girls school was essentially an art school, and you had to take an entrance exam to get into the art program, which I didn't do because I wasn't an art student. But many of my friends there were in the art department. And they all dressed beautifully because most of them mostly made their own clothes. And I envied them unbelievably.
You didn't sew your
My mother did. She had a machine and she never let us use it. So she did the sewing, and I would buy pattern and she would make my clothes. But she was not a, really very good dressmaker. I didn't have a store-bought dress till I was in high school, and I craved to have a store-bought dress, but we didn't have it. My mother made everything, every nightgown, everything we wore was made by my mother, and she worked in this chicken market all week, and the only time she had to make clothes was Sunday afternoon, and we would buy patterns and Vogue patterns. They were 15 cents. And I would find this pattern with this picture, it was gorgeous, and I brought it to my mother, and I said, I want this dress. And we never bought fabric by the yard. We always bought a remnant. You know what a remnant is? A leftover piece, And I would go through all these remnants, and I would find something, and she would then never make it look exactly like the picture, but and I would tell her, it's not like the picture. She said it's enough, like the picture. So I seldom had brand new. It was handed down, 4 girls, handed down. And at some point I rebelled. I said to my mother, I want my very own dress. And my mother said, when you work, you'll have one. I went to college at night. I started during the day, and I had 1 semester, and my mother said, I was only 16 when I graduated from high school, and my mother said, you really can't go during the day. You have to go at night. You get a job, and then you'll go at night. And of course I wept, and it was very important for me to go to school. It was something I really wanted to do. So I wept copious tears, and then I thought, well, this is useless, I'm not gonna do it. So I got a job working in for a law firm, and that was a big career for me. I worked for a law firm for many years, long time. And I went to school at night. I went to City College, I registered, I took the entrance exam, I was accepted, and I never went undergraduate during the day. I got my master's during the day, but I never went to college during the day. And it took me a very long time to get my baccalaureate degree. But I did it. And what I did was I worked for law firms. I learned how to do typing and shorthand. I became very adept at it. And I worked for law firms till I was married.
When did you meet Phil?
37. I went to a dance, and he was hardly a good dancer. Tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, "May I have this dance?" Yes. And then he lived, this was in Brooklyn. I went to this, it was a Jewish center in Brooklyn, and somebody called, I had a big group of girls, we were like a really big group, and somebody called and said, "There's a dance in Brooklyn on a Saturday night," and we said, "Let's go." And we went to Brooklyn. Not just ordinary little group. There were like 7 or 8 I think eight of us went on the subway for a nickel. And we went to this dance. And it was on Ocean Parkway. And I danced with a couple of people, men, boys, and one of them was Phil. And I danced with him, and he wasn't a very good dancer. And he said, "Where do you live?" And I told him. He said, "Well, I'll take you to the subway." I mean, he wasn't going to take me all the way to Manhattan when he lived in Brooklyn. So, here the gang of us and Phil went to the subway, and he put a nickel in for me, and he said good night. And I had given him my phone number where I worked, and because I didn't have a phone in my house. And we had a phone in the candy store downstairs, and when somebody phoned me, the man who owned the candy store would go out to the doorway and he would yell up, very loud, and he would say, "Nettie, telephone," and would fly down the stairs. And that was my telephone.
Wow.
So Phil called on one of the people who called, and he said, and he knew I was working for a law firm, and he wanted to know where it was, and I told him that was right next to the Algonquin Hotel on West 44th Street, and he said, "I will call you," and I gave him my office phone number because it was terrible to call me in that candy store. I had to run down. We didn't have a phone. So, a few days later, I got the phone call, and he said, "Would you like to have lunch with me?" And I said, "Well, that sounds good." So he met me for lunch, and it was next door to the Algonquin Hotel, which still exists, as you know. And there was this big doorman who looked like he came out of Dickens, and I was his friend. So I said to him, "How much is lunch here?" Because Phil said he was going to take me to lunch. So I said to him, "How much is lunch here?" He said, "Too much." So Phil arrived on the scene, and across the street from the Algonquin was a luncheonette. It was a pharmacy, and it had a lunch counter, which was very common then. The pharmacy was in the front, and the lunch counter probably made more money than the pharmacy. So there we sat at the lunch counter, and Phil paid my check, which was very nice for me. And the doorman at the Algonquin had some kind of a funny name for me. He was very, cutie. And for a very long time, I had never been inside the Algonquin. I greeted this doorman every day, and very pleasantly, and he would, be cute. I never went inside. After I was going with Phil for about 2 years, and we were not married yet, he said, "Where would you like to have dinner in this special place?" Because it was like an anniversary of our meeting. I said, "The Algonquin." And I had never been inside. Never. Only the outside. So we came in with another couple, our friends, and I kept grinning the whole time that I was inside the Algonquin. I was about 19 at the time. You think I'd do better. So Phil says to me, "Well, what are you doing?" I said, "I've been outside of this hotel for 2 years, but I was never inside." And I said, and it's a very famous hotel. It's in all the literature.
Yes.
And I said, "I keep thinking of all the people who ate here, and they're not there anymore," but I said I keep visualizing, and the 20s people. And it was a big, big event in my life at the time. I lived in Brooklyn, and Phil and I were working, and I had this very nice apartment in Brooklyn, and our friend bought new X-ray. He was a doctor, and he lived near us, and he invited the whole gang. We had a whole big crowd of friends, and he invited us to get tested by his new X-ray equipment, and we all hopped up there, and we all had our X-rays, chest X-rays done, and he called me, and he said, "Don't be alarmed, but I think we'd like to redo Phil's because we seem to see something on the X-ray and we want to do it another time." But he already assumed that it wasn't good. So we came down, and I was very cheerful with Mary. I figured he couldn't read it, something. But he had already shown it to other hospitals, doctors. And so we learned that he had an active case of tuberculosis. Well, my life became very complicated, and I was married not a long time, and I was pregnant when we learned he had TB. And I had no income, and Phil was in the sanatorium, and I had a baby. I had Bruce. I had my own apartment, and I put my things in storage. I went back to live with my mother. But my mother was really a star. Very crowded apartment. It was World War II, and it was a dreadful time. When he came home from the hospital with a great deal of anxiety, they really didn't want him to come home with a baby in the house because it was very contagious. But I had a set of rules which I obeyed. We had a separate bedroom. I had to have a 2-bedroom apartment, which I couldn't afford, but I had it. My mother helped me with that. And I kept separate dishes, separate towels, everything separate for a very long time.
So where was that apartment? What part of the city?
Knickerbocker Village, downtown Manhattan.
Okay, yeah.
And at one point, poor Ruth, well, we never called Ruth, we called her Ruth Ellen. She said to me, "Why do we need him?"
He could work for a while when he came home.
He did. He started to work for the company that he had worked for. They were very generous to him. He worked 4 hours a day. That's why we moved down where we were, because it was near where his place was. And he worked there for a very long time, many years, and became very successful and did very well. But it took a long time. He started out with a 4-hour day. Couldn't earn much money then. But it was a happy ending, though. It became a very good family, and Phil was successful and healthy, played a lot of golf, and was very political. And we had a good time. We had a very good time. That was a big thing for us to do then. But Phil was adamant about that he was earning more money, and it was a very good deal. We bought a house that needed some work, and we had the work done, but it was a very good moment when we bought that house, because then we sold it for quite a bit more money. It worked out. It worked out well. And Phil went back to playing golf, which he was very unhappy that he wasn't able to play golf, because he was an avid golfer. It's a story with, I would say, a happy ending. I had 3 children. Ruth was the first child, then there was Annie, and then Debbie. It was far apart, and it was mothering at different levels. It was different.
It says, Happy Mother's Day. Look at us. Happy Mother's Day as ever. Ruth. And then on the inside it says, Dear Mom, this photo is one of my very favorite pictures of us. Love, Ruth.
Do you remember that picture?
I see it every day. The first time she got a license, Ruth put Debbie in the car, and Andy, and she was taking her first ride with a new license with her brother and sister, and I had agreed that she could take them. And Phil said to me, came home, he said, why did you want to do that? So I said, well, she had a license, she wanted to go. I was apologizing. I said, oh, I don't know, I couldn't wait for her to come back. It was called Meadowbrook. And he did not like the camp. He didn't even know, but he made up his mind he didn't like it. But I knew he wasn't happy, he wanted to go home. And Phil and I got into a car and drive home, and leaving him there, and he hung on to the car for a while. And my heart was broken, and I really said to Phil, stop and let's take him home, he's not happy. And Phil said, he's gonna adjust to it, you know, have to give him a chance with whatever. I don't know, so I cried all the way home. I will never forget it, this grown person. I was crying all the way home. And he really loved horses. They gave him a room above the stables, and that was his place. He told me he likes it. Now he likes where he is because he sleeps in this big stable where all the horses are. And I think at one point he told me the horses knew him, or he knew the horses, or I don't know. But they got him into something with the horses. And never put the Andy that we know now, with the Andy there. He had to go to the prom in high school, so he was about 17. And he hadn't made a date. And he said to me, I don't have a date to go to the prom. And I said, well, wasn't there somebody in your class? He said, no, I didn't ask anybody. But I could see he wanted to go. So it was that day of the thing. And this I remember. So I said to him, go to the library. You'll meet somebody there. And I said, I'm sure you'll meet somebody there. And whoever you may find him to go. So he said, okay. He went. He came back about 15 minutes later on his bike. And he said, I have a date. I'm going. So I felt very victorious because he seemed, kind of, didn't have a date, didn't have a girl, wasn't going, but underneath it he wanted to go. Well, he learned then. He was, teenager, I suppose. And Ruth was different. She always had dates. Debbie was a good student, and she had a lot of friends. Very friendly. And because when Debbie was born, all my friends already had all their children, so she was like a child to everybody, and she was very cute. And one of our friends, who's gone, he would come home, he would say, wait, let me do Debbie's bath. So here this one of my gang, they would come in and bathe Debbie, you know? And they felt they hadn't really given the same time to their children. I think that was one of them. So she had all these people who thought she was adorable. I couldn't wait to go back to work. And I did. But eventually I went back to, when Debbie was born and growing up, I went back and I taught school. I think when Ruth met David, she was 17 and she had been at the University of Illinois. She finally switched to Michigan. But that was because David was there. And David had a dog. And he brought the dog. And he referred to it as a little white bundle. See, they lived in the Bronx and they had a little apartment. They couldn't keep the dog. So he had the dog in his dorm at school. And then when there was no school, he had to bring the dog back. So he asked if we could keep the dog for him. And we left the dog with Phil in our living room in Marsland. And David and I went for a walk. When we came back, Phil was mad as hell. The dog had wet the carpet. And so David and I were scrubbing the carpet. When we came in, he said the dog made a mess of the carpet. He was angry. So we cleaned the carpet. That didn't help David's case. It was his dog. And then he and Ruth had a falling out. And we told him to come and get his dog. But they did get married eventually. When you tell that story, you have to hurry up too. Rosie and Morris and Phil and I went to Europe together. And that was really something for in-laws. And we called Ruth and David from the airport. And David, in his inimitable fashion, was worried that we might not do so well. He said, no matter what happens with you guys, we're still going to be married. When Ruth was giving birth to you, first child, we got the phone call that she was in the hospital and she was having a baby. So Phil and I, by that time we had a car, and then we got in the car. Oh, we had two cars then, because I was going to school or working, I remember. I backed into the car, our own car. Oh, I never forgot that sound. So, all these memory things. Sunday mornings, and the whole neighborhood knew, and everybody would whistle bicycle too. We became famous for the bicycle. So I have very good memories of that. But our marriage suddenly was tested. I mean, to have been married a brief time and to have this terrible illness. It was a very happy ending though. I'm kind of very fortunate. I want wonderful kids. Very terrific. And so they have wonderful kids. It was a very sad story, but a very happy ending.